And we're back with the Mayor of the Toronto, John Tory, and your questions for him. Here's an email from Philip Chung. Our family lives in a house on Arterial Street off King Street West between Bathurst and Spadina. They've lived there for 24 years. We have watched the neighborhood grow and the entertainment district shift west to King Street West. Our house is now becoming untenable. We now have ourselves making, we have constant noise, traffic, and waste management complaints with no clear resolve. What has the city been doing or planning to do to protect the rights of residents living in the neighborhood before the changes?
I guess
the city's growing.
The answer is the best we can. But this is a problem, of course, that happens in any city that is growing, that as you have growth and condominium buildings coming in and different, entertainment venues getting established, that it does change the nature of the neighborhood as hard as you try to make sure that isn't the case. And so I would only say to you, we have, as you know, a whole variety of city resources devoted to trying to make sure that life remains livable for you, the person who wrote, and others like you. And so that consists of inspectors, it consists of police officers, it consists of people who collect garbage. And if there are particular problems, I'd suggest you call 311 or call your city councillor. And I'm sure you may have tried to do this, and otherwise call me and draw these things to my attention. But the one thing that I can't change is that you live in a location in the downtown of a huge, dynamic, bustling city. And that part, the huge, dynamic, bustling part, is good news. And there are sacrifices that go with that. I live in a condo downtown, and I can tell you, I live on the 11th floor, but when the partying goes on, especially at this time of year when the students move into the U of T, because I live around Bloor Street, it's noisy. And I don't like that, and it does sometimes wake me up in the night long after I've gone to sleep when they're partying. But I accept the fact that I live in the downtown of a great city where I can walk out my door and go to the subway or go to a restaurant. So I'm not minimizing your problems. I'm just saying that we can try to address them, but you live in the downtown of a big, bustling city. It's never going to be the same as when that used to be a quiet street 50 years ago. It's not going to be the same. It can't be.
When you talk about quality of life downtown, you came up with an announcement, I guess it was about 2 weeks ago, talking about parkland. And people comment about the fact that there isn't that much parkland downtown, and you were talking about creating a park.
The very area where that person who wrote in, and thank you for writing, that very area around King and Spadina and so on is the most parks deficient area of the entire city. Because we've allowed all those towers to be built, that has changed those neighborhoods. Admittedly, it's changed them. I think it's changed them in a way that's very lively and very alive and dynamic, but it's changed them. And we have not accompanied those buildings with parks that need to be built. And so we've made this proposal, and a lot of people have been wringing their hands about it and saying, oh my goodness, this sounds like too big a project, or how will we ever pay for it? I am determined that if we're going to stay as one of the most livable cities in the world, which we are, then we have to address that parks deficiency downtown. And if we can do it through a clever way, like decking over the rail lands, which are quite frankly ugly and divide the city one part from another, then we will find a way to pay for it. All the developers who built those towers that are down there, they put money into a fund specifically to provide for parks for people who live in those condos. We're now going to invest that money in building a spectacular park that will be known around the world, and I am determined in my time in office to get it done. And so people that want to hand-wring about it and say it's too big and too bold, fine. That's not a problem, but I am not going to succumb to that. We've done that too often in the city on transit and on parks, and I'm not for that. I'm for getting these things done because they have to get done.
Okay, and I have to get this done. Another break. When we come back, your questions for the Mayor of the City of Toronto, John Tory, right back after this. And we're back at 8:30 from 299 Queen Street West, Toronto's breaking news, CP24. We're here with John Tory, the Mayor of the City of Toronto, and welcome back. And so we're going to put out the contact numbers because people are still want to email and phone in. And if you want to phone in, we're going to put the number up right now. It's 872-2724, 416, of course. You can email cp24.com, and you can also tweet Ask the Mayor, CP24. So let's just get right to some of the questions. And here's an email from Alan. The federal government just announced $500 million for the TTC. Yet the next day, it was reported that these funds could not be used to cover a shortfall in next year's TTC budget. Why not? Can you change this?
Well, the funds are to be used for capital purposes. I mean, I think most people who deal with business budgeting and so forth know that there's capital, which is like streetcars and subway cars and repairs to those things, and then operating costs, which are things like wages and electricity to run the subway and so on. And the TTC runs a significant operating deficit, which is financed. That means a deficit beyond what the fare-paying customers pay. The passengers pay a fare that covers about 80% of the cost of running, a little more, and the rest is covered by the taxpayers generally. So the City of Toronto puts, say, this year about, I think, $550 million into running the TTC. And they have said, the federal government, they want this money to be used for repairs, to have the subway become more reliable and things like that. You can buy new buses, which we're going to do, new streetcars, which we're going to do, and so on, but not to pay for an operating deficit. So they've been clear the money is for capital and not to fund an operating deficit. So if there's an operating deficit, it has to be made up by a combination of things like savings you can find in how you run the operation, to find ways to run it better, which we're trying to do, and also a fare increase. And I've said, look, we should be honest about this and say to people, just as the TTC's costs go up every year because there are modest wage increases given to the employees and electricity prices go up and so on, we should say to the customers, well, there's going to be a fare increase to cover those costs. And that's just an honest way to do business, instead of trying to pretend to people these costs aren't going up. And then if you freeze fares for 2 or 3 years, you're hit with a much bigger increase later. And so I've tried to be honest about this and say people should expect there will be some adjustment to the fares pretty much every year, because costs go up pretty much every year, paying wages to employees and paying for electricity and so on. And so that's why, though, to answer your question, we can't spend the federal money on. By the way, if they said, or the province said, the province used to pay for some of the operating expenses, they wanted to get back into the business of helping us pay to operate the transit system, I would happily accept that. But they have not said that. They've helped with capital, and I appreciate that, not with operating costs.
Well, while we're talking about the TTC, and I know that you take the subway virtually every morning, I also understand that you've accepted a challenge from a woman. Tell us about that in case other people haven't heard.
Well, a woman whose name just escapes me at the moment, but she started tweeting in June because she was going through what I have accepted was an unacceptable experience a lot of people had with the air conditioning on the Bloor Street subway cars this year. We didn't have the problem on the Yonge subway because it's the new rocket trains, they call it, that have new air conditioning. But the old Bloor Street trains, a lot of the air conditioning units seemed to all break down when we had a very hot summer. And so the woman started tweeting at me in the summer and saying, would I ride on one of these trains with her to experience what she had experienced over the course of this summer? And I didn't see it myself, but my staff did, and sort of brought it to my attention just recently. And I said, well, of course I would actually ride with her, because the experience of doing that and hearing her talk of her experience this summer, even though summer's almost over, will be useful to me. And then I said yesterday, and I'll repeat it here tonight, obviously something fell between the cracks when we didn't get on top of the fact a lot of these air conditioning units were not in good shape before a hot summer. And so we have to find a better way to identify which ones are about to give up the ghost and do better than that next year. And we have to find a way to do better than it taking 4 to 10 days to repair these air conditioning units. Because now we're doing what people would roll their eyes at, typical of government, which is getting all the air conditioning units fixed just around Labor Day when it won't be hot anymore. And I don't accept that as being good, nor does Mr. Byford, who runs the TTC. So we're going to sit down together, and I'm going to ride with this woman first, hear of this experience. I know a lot about it, obviously, already. And we're going to do much better than that next summer. Much better, because we owe it to the people who ride to have these air conditioning units in good order before the summer and to keep them in good order as best we can. They're trying hard at the TTC, but we can always do better.
Okay, let's hit the streets now. Christina Tenalia is out there. Christina, are you still at that Pride meeting?
No, we've moved on. We're in the city's East End, and we're getting questions from people in the city. We'll have questions for the mayor. And, Stephen, this question has to do, once again, with the TTC. I'm here with Space. You have a question for the mayor. Look right into the camera and ask the mayor.
I was wondering about the scheduled TTC construction on weekends. Why does it happen on the weekends? And why are the weekends chosen? I know sometimes it's really inconvenient for a lot of people getting to work on the weekends and going to important events on the weekends. And also the shuttle buses that do run so that people can board them sometimes are a little slow to get on because there are a lot of people boarding and a lot of people fighting to get on. So I wonder if there's any reason for it being on the weekends, or if there's any improvements in the way to improve the busyness during weekend commutes and stuff like that.
Well, Faith, thanks for the question. It's a very fair question. And first of all, there's a lot of things being done now that are exciting for the TTC. For example, a lot of these closures on weekends are to put in the new signaling system, which will allow trains to run closer together, which will increase capacity and lead to less overcrowding. So this is a good news story in the end. But the reason we do it on weekends is obviously because the level of passenger traffic on the TTC during the weekend on the subway is way less than on a weekday. On weekdays, we have a window of only between 1 a.m. and 6 a.m. to do everything, to clean up the stations, repair the tracks, keep the cars in repair, because the subway runs, all the time. And of course, you can't have repairs going on during rush hour, especially. On weekends, there isn't a rush hour per se. We try our best, and I think they do a good job with the shuttle buses. But of course, you're right. It takes longer for people to get on and off in large numbers a shuttle bus than it does a subway car, which has a lot of doors. So we're always trying to do better at that. But the repairs are something that is short-term pain for long-term gain, in that we'll get a new signal system, tracks replaced so that the subway runs better, is more reliable, fewer breakdowns, and so on. And that's what people have told us very clearly they have to have, and they should have.
Okay, let's just go to Sandy Benita, the queen of tweets. What have you got for us, Sandy?
I have a tweet from somebody named Made in Canada, and she wants to know, will John Tory support a low-income pass for TTC riders?
Well, in that regard, first of all, a report is coming forward to the Board of Health, I think at the end of September, that puts forward a proposal for exactly that kind of thing. But I think most people out there, including lower income people, will understand that in order to have a low-income some kind of low-income fare differential that works, you have to be able to do it electronically. You can't have people coming up and having a means test at the window where they presently have to buy a token. And so it really awaits the proper and effective implementation of the Presto card across the city. And that's going to happen through the course of the rest of this year and into next. And we then have to make sure Presto is working properly, because Presto can then be given the capacity to account for things like fares for students, fares for elderly people, fares for lower income people, and so on. The only other thing I'll point out, Stephen, is this. We took one step to help families that were in need, and I'm told it's been a very well-received and quite successful thing, and this would come from the people who are in charge of the anti-poverty measures in the city, to give kids 12 and under free transit. And of course, that helps kids who are not in poor circumstances, but it's helped a lot of kids in school and with families where they don't have to pay for those kids to ride the transit to school or to the library or to shopping. And we took that step already. And while some have criticized it, most people think it's a very effective measure. And we've been told by anti-poverty activists it's working.
Okay, let's just hit the phones again. Dawit in Mississauga, you're on live. You have a call. You have a question for the mayor.
Good afternoon, good evening, Mayor.
Hello, sir.
My name is Dawit, and I have a question. I'm a driver for 22 years in Toronto. I've been billed by my city how to drive a taxi, how to act with difficult customers, and all this. But my value of 22 years now been thrown out with the new system of Uber. And I cannot compete with Uber because with all the expense we have in front of us, and we are the taxpayers too, and the conjunction overnight happen with new, different kind of cars is amazing. Traffic is backing it up. So how do you see this, sir?
Well, sir, thank you for the call, and I'm very sympathetic to the fact that technology, largely in the form of things like Uber, have made a big change in the taxi industry, just as technology, for example, has made a huge change in the newspaper business. I mean, these are businesses that are under assault, in effect, from new technology. But what we did to try to make up for that is we, first of all, licensed and regulated Uber, so they had to have insurance like you do. They had to have driver inspections like you did and car inspections like you do. But we also, and this is forgotten about, we brought about huge reductions, hundreds of dollars in the costs of various fees that were paid for by people in the cab industry to try and make the situation more competitive for them. And so we did that because we recognized the fact that technology had changed your industry and that we wanted to make it possible for you to live a life. We also reduced a lot of the other regulatory burdens. So you no longer have to go to a place. We say to get a car inspection, you can go to a place that's of a much broader choice to get your car inspections done. You have to have many fewer days of in-class training, which is time taken away from driving. So we made a lot of changes to try and make it easier for the cab industry to compete. We'll see how those go, but our objective is to have a healthy cab industry, but also to give people choice of some of the latest technologies like Uber and Lyft. And I think that's just the way the world is going. And it's not my, doing. It is the doing of inventive, smart people the world over who are bringing about lots of changes to lots of different industries.
Okay, let's take another quick break. We'll be right back with your questions, your tweets, your calls right after this.